All right, it is 10 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation on sprains, strains, and automobiles. If you've been in this business very long at all, you've probably been affected by this in some sort. Everybody has somebody somewhere who's been on light duty and disrupted business of some sort. Or maybe you yourself have had problems, or you've had family members who've had problems. It's common amongst all industries, but in particular, it's common in ours for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I know your time is valuable, so let's not waste any of it. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go through a 5-year analysis of all of our claims data that shows the relationship of sprains and strains to all the claims that we've had over the last 5 years. We're going to talk about enterprise-wide controls, so things that the company can do as a whole to reduce the cost of sprains and strains and the frequency of sprains and strains. And we're also going to talk about specific risk factors of sprains and strains in dealerships and different controls and strategies to prevent them. So let's go ahead and jump into the claims analysis. I put a little figure in there for a DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. That's something for me to kind of keep me on track whenever I'm looking at process improvements or anything like that. So this stage, we're going through the define, measure, and analyze. It's up to you guys to improve and control, if that makes sense to you. But anyway, so what is the problem? Let's define the problem here. Sprains and strains account for 38% of all the dollars spent by MADA's workers' comp fund. And that was from the time I ran the data, October to October, 5 years apart, this year to 5 years ago. And that accounts for almost more than $7 million. And you also have to look at the bigger picture as well. Even though sprains and strains are 38%, you see hernias are on there at 3%, carpal tunnel, the multiple injury that could have some of the same causes as a sprain and strain. So the cost could actually be significantly higher. And doing some of these processes and controls that I'm going to talk about could have an even larger effect on the bigger piece of the pie than that 38%. But that 38% alone, obviously, is a significant portion of where all the dollars are going for our workers' compensation fund. And it affects the cost for everybody who's part of it. Everybody on this webinar, the company that you work for, you're paying more because of this high amount of sprains and strains. So let's look deeper into what those sprains and strains are, the cause of them, sorted by the frequency. So how often it's happening according to each cause. And if you look at the pie chart, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you add up objects lifted or handled, overexertion, twisting, cumulative trauma, reaching, pushing, pulling, those account for 58% of all of the claims that are considered sprains and strains in our claim system. So obviously that's where I'm going to be attacking the most today, even though these other categories do hold quite a bit of weight. For example, the 21% from falls on the same or different level, not related to ice and snow. Marlon and I are constantly preaching good housekeeping practices, cleaning up oils, spills, things of that nature. All of those things are related to that. And I feel like we hit that hammer pretty frequently. Same with ice and snow. Everybody's got their walk like a penguin poster up right now. So obviously we hammer that one really hard too. But also we can't discount its importance for preventing sprains and strains. And then the 6.9% that are related to vehicle crashes. So let's break those down by cost. The same causes of sprains and strains. Whenever we sort it by cost, objects lifted or handled, significantly more than any other category of 1.4 million. Overexertion, which I mean, depending on what information the adjuster is given at the time, it could go one or the other. Same with pushing or pulling. Then it breaks down into falls from the same level, twisting. So this ergonomic category that I'm looking at are this body mechanics. Clearly, there's a strong correlation of costs. The objects lifter handled the overexertion, the pushing and pulling, the twisting. And of course, we can't discount everything else that's on there. Now let's look at body part. Shoulders, it makes sense. We do a lot of work overhead in our industry, particularly in the service department. I'm going to break that down later on in the presentation, but it makes sense why shoulders would be such an issue, especially nowadays since most people are kind of rounded over at the shoulders from the postures that we take with technology, the time we spend in the car, myself included. Forward shoulders are a major problem, as well as forward heads, which create issues of space inside of that joint and ultimately can lead to labrum tears and things of that nature. So it's no surprise to me, at least, that shoulders would be such a high cost driver. Backs, no different. Everybody knows somebody who's had some sort of back injury, and it is very hard to fix a back. So multiple body parts, that would be the vehicle crashes, and they got thrown in that category. Knees, also a significant cost driver. Arms, upper arm, like that's closer to the shoulder, etc. But the backs and shoulders are obviously going to be a big topic of discussion whenever I'm going through risk factors. And this is by frequency. That was by cost. This is by frequency of body part. Back moved it up one more in the list. Frequency breeds severity over time. And that's part of the reason why that's so high up on the list in both categories. Shoulders, knees, same difference. And you can kind of start to see a little bit of the trend here. Age group. Big topic of discussion in the safety community right now is the aging workforce that we have. And it's not just our industry, it's everybody. But if you look at the graphs, you almost see a complete inverse relationship amongst age groups and frequency and cost. For example, on the left, you see the total cost of the sprains per strains in millions. The people 20 to 29 make up a very small portion of that total cost. It's that 50 to 59 that is the most costly. However, if you look and compare that to the chart on the right, on the frequency, look how many sprains and strains you get in that 20 to 29 age group. 205 are making up that 0.42 of cost. And with your 50 to 59, also significantly inverse relationship as far as those data points go. So the younger guys and gals are getting hurt more often, and the older ones take longer to heal, and they're typically more severe. And that's what we can kind of draw from that. No surprise on this by department. Service technicians, mechanics make up the bulk of the sprains and strains that we get reported. Sales, if you guys want to guess on where they're getting their sprains and strains from, I'm going to guess, actually I know, it's from slips and falls primarily, and primarily from ice and snow. That's one of their biggest exposures, which is why we are hammering on that so hard right now. Do you know February is the #1 month for slips and falls? Makes sense, right? Considering the weather we've had over the last couple of weeks. Detailers, lube technicians, porters, get readies, all are pretty similar. Body shop technicians, I thought would be a little bit higher. But as you can see, if we're going to focus our efforts, it's fixed operations, 100%. If we're looking at that body mechanics, that ergonomic type category. This one's just for fun. Most used terms in the incident descriptions. I took out the word alleges in indefinite articles like a and the. I might have left some in there, but that gives us a better picture of what's actually going on, what the description of the accident is. It's a small 1 or 2 sentence narrative. So overexertion, excessive, lifted object or handled, twisting, effort. I'll give you a pretty good idea of what these claims look like. So what can we draw from that data? Sprains and strains are definitely the most significant cost driver for our workers' comp fund. Drives up the premium for everybody, including your dealership. Even though you may not have had any, we are a self-insured fund. Lifting, pulling, pushing, twisting, those ergonomic type activities are driving the sprain and strain. Cost, age strongly influences cost, and we'll talk about that, all of these more in detail later, but the workforce is aging, particularly in these safety sensitive positions, your master techs, things of that nature. Intervention now could help us control costs, not just now, but in the future. Shoulders and backs are a big problem. And unfortunately, there does not appear to be a magic bullet. We can slice and cut data all day long, but there is not one single cellular activity that's going to significantly move the needle for us as far as driving these costs down. So we have to take an all-encompassing approach. And that's whenever, that's why I'm going to break down these enterprise-wide controls. But some of the challenges that we have as a work comp fund, we rely on human factors more than other industries. We are never going to be able to take the human completely out of the equation when it comes to service, body shops, until we can get some robot buddies that can, you know, think a little bit more clearly. So like in a manufacturing environment, we can use robotics. We can decrease the interaction of the human with the product, but we can't do that in our industry. Different tasks with different ergonomic risks and different configurations are a part of life. No technician is going to do the same job every single day. No body shop person is going to work on the same car and do the same body panel every single day. So we don't have these one size fits all solutions. Parts and materials are hardly ever configured for a person to handle easily. If you've ever tried to pick up, transmissions, things of that nature, none of these things are for people to pick up. They're supposed to be on the car in a fixed position. So unideal postures are a way of life also. I mentioned this earlier, reaching overhead, bending down into the hood of the car, contorting shoulders, wrists, hands, in uneasy to reach places put all of our workers at risk on a day-to-day basis. So what are some of these enterprise-wide controls that I mentioned that can reduce sprains and strains? Pre-employment screening, and I'm going to jump into all of these in more detail. Employee engagement, training, not just the employees, but also the management intervention or observation and correction, early intervention of injuries and potential injuries, and addressing personal risk factors. So one slide on pre-employment physicals, because there are a lot of ins and outs in this. And if this is something that you seriously want to look into, please reach out to us. And also something that you should probably run by an attorney as well. Before you even think about doing a pre-employment physical, you should have a written job description that outlines the physical requirements and that are essential to the job, because how else would the firm know what they're measuring against? And are you only collecting the data that you need to know as the employer? There's the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you need to sit down with the firm that would be conducting this pre-employment physical, and possibly with an attorney, and decide what is reasonable accommodation for the job that we're hiring for, and what would kick somebody out of the running of that position, and how would we address that. So, but it is an outstanding tool if you do it properly, and you can do it properly. And if you're at a point in your dealership saga where you can implement something like this, I strongly suggest you do it, because we can understand going into it what sort of pre-existing conditions this person may have. What can we do to keep them from aggravating that? Not as a employer against employee type situation, but in a co-op to keep them from getting hurt. We can also be able to tell if they already have reduced range of motion or reduced strength. So whenever they do get injured and we go back and look at their pre-employment physical, we know they only had 80% mobility in that shoulder beforehand. and on a long enough timeline, highly cost-effective activity. I talked to a group down in Washington not very long ago. They said that they get their chiropractic office local to do them for $60 per visit, and that's with the pre-employment drug screen included. And they take them through all of the ranges of motion, overhead, lifting, squatting, hip hinging, all these primal movement patterns, and they look at how much exertion they're capable of. It's a really great test, and it's really cost effective. But like I said, if this is a route that you want to go, please, please, please do your homework, because an ADA, unfair labor practice, anything like that, it's not something that you want to mess with as a company. So please reach out. Employee engagement and awareness activities. I would like to break down for you guys some mandatory or optional stretching or warm-up programs. Communicating and raising awareness of risks and potential long-term implications of not doing things properly. Teaching proper lifting technique and weight limits. What is your team lifting requirement? Communication tools that are at the employee's disposal for assistance, and management observation and intervention. So what are the best practices as far as employee engagement goes? Just like any other safety program. We need training for all employees, new hire, and refresher training. I like to do annual training. I think it's a good reminder, and it reminds everybody that it is important to you. But what do we want to cover? Good body mechanics and lifting technique, the importance of stretching and warming up, when and how to safely use mechanical assistance devices that you have on site. Do you have forklifts? Do you have those twist jacks, different carts, dollies, hand trucks? What's there and when am I supposed to be using it? I feel like that's not something that's addressed with a lot of the employees. I think it's kind of a figure it out on your own type thing, which is not recommended. But if you need help implementing a training program of some sort like this, please let me know. Marlon and I were just talking about it. We should probably get a module together that addresses sprains and strains directed for employees themselves. In order to do this, you need to have top-down management involvement. You need to be actively engaging all of your employees, just like your safety program. If it's important to you, it'll be important to them. You need to cover the whole picture. Why is it important to them? Something that I found a lot of success with when discussing with technicians, detailers, whoever it might be, is longevity and living a pain-free lifestyle. These people are going to be doing this sort of labor for the majority of their lives, if not the rest of their lives, if this is the career path they decided to take. So maybe we should start thinking about it now in your 30s, your 40s, early 50s, before things start to get bad for you. And of course, you need to walk the talk. You as the manager need to enforce any kind of policies that you're going to put in place. You need to engage casually, friendly reminders, things of that nature. All best practices for engaging your employees. So I mentioned stretching and warming up programs. A good stretching and warm-up program is a supplement and not a substitute for a comprehensive ergonomics program or sprain and strain prevention program, or MSD, musculoskeletal disorder. That's another term I might throw in there, but basically just means soft tissue sprain and strain injuries. But it needs to be relevant to the job and task oriented. We can't go out there and start doing nonsense without any scientific proof that it's actually going to do anything for the employee. It needs to be given some time to work. You can't put in a stretch and warm-up program and expect no musculoskeletal disorders to happen within the next month to a year. You have to give it some time to work. It takes time for the body to adapt, to be limber and agile. It needs to be driven from the top, of course. I am going to keep saying that over and over again because it is that important that management and your frontline supervisors accept and reinforce the program. It's also an opportunity to multitask. I think it's a good time if you were to have like a pre-shift department meeting to kind of distribute responsibilities for the day, make that your stretching and warming up time. I think that's definitely the best way to do it. I have a case study here for you. This is a large distribution center that partnered with an ergonomic firm to attack their high MSD recordable rate. So what they did was they had an athletic trainer come in, and they designed a stretching and warm up program based on the specific jobs, which is exactly what we would want you guys to do. Right now, we're kind of partnered with SERC in Kansas City that can absolutely do that for you. And we've been talking to some other companies on the east side of the state that would be able to do this for you. Give you recommendations for what kind of activities would be a good priming for the job that your employees are about to perform. But in this case, if you look at the charts, we saw an outstanding reduction in MSD related OSHA recordable cases. So before, you can just see the before and after. They had a 64% reduction in all OSHA recordable cases and 80% reduction in musculoskeletal disorders. What I found to be most important was how the employees responded to this program. Almost 98% of the workers surveyed indicated that the pre-shift warm-up stretching program is effective in preparing their body for work. 84% of the workers surveyed feel the pre-shift warm-up stretching program is effective for improving their overall health and work performance. And 100% thought the coach was doing an effective job. Those were the important points that I wanted to pull out of the study, because how your employees view this activity is going to dictate the success. Anybody can go through the motions of doing anything without actually taking it to heart. It's not going to do anything for the employee, and it's not going to do anything for you. Some considerations before implementing a warm-up stretching program. Again, doesn't work if you don't. So leadership needs to buy in, promote the program, assign responsibilities of who's going to host these trainings, or not these trainings, these sessions every morning, and who's going to hold people accountable. Strongly suggest you get a professional opinion for the contents of the program. They need to do a workplace assessment to build a program that focuses on real life tasks that employees perform. Static stretching cold muscles could be counterproductive. So like decades ago, before football games, you would see guys reaching down and touching their toes. Now it's more fluid motions. It's lunging and twisting. It's doing Russian kicks with a straight leg up in the air. And there's something behind that, but you don't need to take it from me. You should take it from a physical therapist who's going to look at the actual program of how it fits into your workplace. Consider the costs and benefits up front. It's not free because it is going to take time out of your day, but that's essentially all it's going to take. But the initial visit, we can get pricing up front for you, whatever you need. But strongly recommend that you guys look into this, because what's preventing one sprain and strain per year going to do for you? $50,000 off your premium, or sent to your mod factor. What about two of them? It can really add up quickly, especially if you're in one of these bigger groups. It's easy to justify it at that point. I understand if you don't get one, but every few years. But anyway, encourage and utilize early reportings of injuries. So early intervention, a big topic of discussion with us right now. Early reporting, diagnosis, and intervention can limit the injury severity, improve effectiveness of the treatment, minimize permanent damage, thus reducing your work comp cost. And then at that point, it allows you as the employer to take a look at what they were doing. We can address it. Maybe we can think of some alternatives that aren't going to stretch the body in that way. This is one of your best tools before it turns into a lost time injury, to get out there and figure out what it is that's causing it, what we can do, and giving them some treatment, ice, heat, depending on what it is, stretching, strengthening programs, all things that can absolutely close that claim out much earlier and cheaper. SERC, I mentioned them earlier. They have a program over in Kansas City. They go almost as far as Columbia. So if you're in those areas, definitely something to look into. They have an early intervention program. It's $75 a visit for those almost injuries. Like I'm hurting a little bit. They'll do an assessment. They'll make sure they don't need to see a a specialist. They make sure something's not torn. And they'll do that massage, ice, heat, electronic stimulation. They'll give you stretches or self-myofascial release, like the foam roller, as in sitting on a lacrosse ball. All of those activities that can get those knots out of those muscles and get them working back to normal again before it turns into a tear. They cap it at 6 visits, and then they refer them to medical. If you're interested in that, contact Marlon. He's over on that side, so it'll probably be him. But on the other sides of the state, St. Louis, Cape Girardeau, Springfield, let me know, and we'll see if we can help you find somebody that can do similar treatment. Using light duty and accommodating restrictions. Those of you claim coordinators out there who have had these lost time injuries know how we take it seriously. I'm sure the adjuster is on you pretty hard about that. And Marlon and I both discussed those at each one of our visits with office managers, getting people back to work. Why? Because it significantly reduces the cost of the claim. So we can get people back in the workplace quicker by making them feel like they're part of society versus them sitting at home doing nothing and receiving TTD checks. So that's a reason to do it. Another reason to do it is whenever you have a claim that is medical only 30% of the cost of that claim is going to get applied to your experience modifier, which is part of the calculation for coming up with your work comp premium, as opposed to the 100% that would be used if there is more than 3 days of lost time. Essentially, it's a lost time claim. So you don't need to tell, I don't need to tell you again how important it is, but it is part of the certified safety program, and we're going to continue to hammer this hard because it reduces the cost of the claim substantially. Training, we need to teach proper lifting technique. You need to implement a lifting limit in team lifting protocol. So how much can one person lift in your dealership? Do you have a limit? Have you discussed this? Something to think about. When do I need to get someone to help me? What is that weight limit? Positioning of the vehicle or parts in relation to the body. So do I need to raise the vehicle or lower the vehicle? This is some of the lowest hanging fruit that Marlon and I see on almost a daily basis. Somebody reaching way up overhead when they shouldn't be, or stooping way down low when they shouldn't be. And you need to make sure they know what mechanical assistance is available to them, when to use it and how to use it. So when we're teaching proper lifting technique, it's not rocket science. What I did, this was probably 5 years ago or so, I had my daughter, she was about 2 or 3 at the time, conduct the proper way to lift something, as opposed to me who did it improperly. Because children have awesome lifting technique. If you watch them like reach down and grab a ball, they're actually going to squat at their knees, like the guy is on the right here, as opposed to us adults who have poor habits. We're often not going to keep that neutral spine. So make sure we tell everybody, bend your knees, lift with your legs, not your back, like you've always heard. Keep that neutral spine. Another good tool is keeping the load as close to your body as possible. If you watch professional powerlifters like deadlifters, imagine trying to deadlift with the bar, 6 inches in front of you, how much stress that's going to put on your lower back. It's no different whenever we're using significantly less weight, and we do it more often. It's that frequency that's going to cause that cumulative trauma. I get frustrated whenever we get these claims, often because it wasn't that one lift that caused that person to have that issue, that sprain or strain. It was the many years of doing this improperly that caused micro tears and damage to their musculoskeletal system. And finally, it was the straw that broke the camel's back whenever it happened at work. So make sure you guys are teaching that properly. Tell them to avoid twisting, team lift when possible. Lift from an elevated surface when possible. So if we don't have to go from the ground, why should we? That's not working harder, just making your body work harder. We need to think about working smarter. And our lifts will never be perfect. Some of those challenges I talked about earlier, we don't have uniform parts that we lift all day, every day. But if we can look at these different aspects of a lift, we can make some positive adaptations from the current norm, which isn't great. I spend a lot of time in service departments. NIOSH lifting equation, I wanted to throw this out there as part of the teaching lifting, proper lifting, because it has some really good points. There is a formula that the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, they're a part of the CDC, uses whenever they are calculating the ideal lift that a worker should have throughout a work shift. And you can see there in the formula, there's different coefficients that they apply to each one of these categories, and they multiply them all up together, and that gives you your lifting index. So one of the things is distance in front of the body from the midline of the feet. So directly between like your arches, arch to arch, how far in front of that is, height lifted from and to, the height of the load, how tall it is, the frequency of the lift, how many times they're doing it per day, the hand load and coupling. Do they have something to grab onto? Is it, or are they just trying to pinch the sides of something? That's not going to work. And the amount of torso twisting. And all this together makes our lifting index. If we had a perfect lift, all of these things were ideal, NIOSH says the adult male should never lift over 51 pounds. I asked a group of guys on Friday, how many times do you lift over 51 pounds today? And all of them just, shook their head and laughed a little bit. We lift a lot of heavy stuff. So things we can learn from this is, keeping that amount of space from the midline. So keeping it close to our body. We can minimize the lift distance. We can minimize the frequency of the lifting when possible, even though that's not really a possibility with a lot of what we do. We can think about how we're holding on to things, and we can limit twisting and awkward postures through training. So like I said, not a one size fits all, but we need to keep these basic concepts in the backs of our minds whenever we are teaching employees the right way to do this. There's some resources out there. There's a NIOSH lifting application. There's lots of resources on OSHA.gov. And I would recommend having a guest speaker like a physical therapist come in to train everybody because they're pros. They do this all the time for companies. And of course, Marlon and Justin, myself, or Marlon next door, can get something together for you, or we can help you find a good guest speaker, a physical therapist, to teach proper lifting technique. Risk item number 3, risk factors for musculoskeletal disorders in dealerships and controls and strategies to prevent them. So some of the more specific things. And I broke it down into 5 categories, which I'm going to go over each one of these in detail. So excessive force, like this guy trying to drag a barrel across the ground, maybe he should have a barrel dolly with him. But in this category, and you saw this in our descriptions for causes, excessive force being one of the leading ones, lifting heavy objects, pushing or pulling heavy loads, breaking bolts loose, manually pouring materials, like heavy oil dollies, maintaining control of equipment or tools, which is something we don't think about too terribly often. But there are some controls for it. Mechanical assistance is always going to be the number one. Us safety nerds, when we're going to safety school, we always put things to the test of hierarchy of controls. If we want to improve a process to make it safer, of course, we want to eliminate it first, elimination, substitute it, do something else. We generally can't do that for most tasks. So the next most appropriate and effective thing would be engineering controls. And in our industry, those are the car pushers, the tire and wheel dollies, like the one the gentleman's using in the picture there. There's a store in Cape Girardeau that recently bought one of those, and the technicians love it, and even the service manager loves it. Those scissor lift tables you GM folks had to buy for your electric battery removal, that would be an example of an engineering control, or just a general cart to move things from point A to point B. These things are all awesome tools, and we need to be teaching where they are and how we're doing it. Use those lifting training tips that I gave you, and you need to put a lift limit in place. 50 pounds, 100 pounds, it's up to you. But I strongly suggest you stick close to that 50-pound area in having that team lifting policy. Lifting belts and harnesses doesn't actually keep you from getting hurt, but it does serve as a tangible reminder to use proper lifting technique. When I was a safety manager at a plant, I would have I had a whole file cabinet just packed full of them and wrist braces and stuff. And I would always tell people, this isn't a long-term solution for you. Why? Because eventually your muscles in your lower back, your rector spinae, and quadratus lumborum, and all of that fun stuff is going to atrophy because you're relying on a belt or harness to keep your back straight, and you're not using your core stabilizing muscles. So it's not a long-term solution. But like I said, it can be a reminder to use good technique. Risk factors: repetitive motion or trauma. So repetitive motion isn't something we see a whole lot of in our industry, unless there's very special circumstances. But vibrating tools are generally going to be considered cumulative trauma activities, or tools that cause cumulative trauma. Why? Because the small capillaries can be damaged and make hand tools difficult to control. Hand-arm vibration may cause a worker to lose feeling in the hands and arms that result in increased force exertion to control hand-powered tools. So because of the vibration itself, I'm having to squeeze harder, I'm having to push harder. And that is going to potentially lead to a debilitating injury, not just for my hands, not just for my wrist, but possibly my shoulder, and even all the way to my back. Because if you think about the postures that the employees are using these in, generally not ideal postures at all. Usually it's overhead. Usually my hand is going to be cocked. So something to think about is definitely, if you do ever get a job that requires a whole lot of vibration, using job rotation. Those administrative controls that come after engineering controls, switching the person out for the job. Awesome tool. Anti-vibration tools are a thing now, have been for a while. So you've definitely heard us talk about anti-vibration gloves, but the technician, I know some of them are very proud of buying their tools, and they want the best of the best. Maybe they might go for an anti-vibrational tool. Periodic maintenance on those tools are also very important, making sure they're nice and oiled. If you guys have ever pushed a mower and bent the crankshaft on it even a little bit, and what that does to your hands, you know what I'm talking about. So making sure your tools are in good condition are absolutely going to reduce the amount of vibration stress that you get. But anti-vibration gloves, way underused tool. If it's gel or elastic in the palm where that vibration impact is, you're going to have much better results than anywhere else, obviously. Cotton, leatherwork glove don't give you adequate protection against vibration, but you do need those. Of course, you need those for, heat, general work. You need chemical resistant gloves for chemical resistance work. So you can't discount them, and I know it's hard to get people to change gloves while they're trying to do a job. That's probably the hardest part about talking guys into doing it. But if we can always revert back to this is for you, this is for your long-term health in this industry of being a productive, happy, and healthy employee, maybe we can get some guys to start using those more frequently. Static loading is something that we don't talk about very often. So holding an object in place for extended periods of time. For example, technician holds a starter in place with one hand and tightens the bolts with the other. Like the person in the picture over here, you can see they're holding whatever that is up with one hand and they're screwing it in with the other. So this is particularly common for mechanics and body shop personnel because we got to hold things in place, and often it's not in an easy place to do it. So this is essentially just causing almost as much stress on the body as lifting something super heavy would be. Just hold it like doing a plank for a long, long time, but with the smaller muscles of your shoulders and in your back doing that work. So we have some controls. Of course, going back to the mechanical assistants, you guys have all seen these pogo jacks or spin jacks, whatever you want to call them, the 6-footers. Are often what a lot of guys call them, but definitely a tool we need to use. Fellow worker assistance, making sure the guys know, hey, I can ask somebody to hold this in place for me while I screw it in. Or even, hey, maybe if I just use my head and I screw it in enough to where I don't have to hold it with my other hand, maybe if we see that sort of behavior, you managers out there, and you want to correct some behavior, that's a good way to take the stress off the employee, off of their physical body. And adjusting posture to reduce the strain. So instead of raising my hand all the way over my head to hold something in place, maybe just a little bit over my head, where I'm a little bit stronger is a better way to do it, or vice versa. Just depends on what exactly we're doing. Awkward postures, as you can see in the pictures, these are things we see every single day in every department almost. Even the guys in the top left, it doesn't look so bad, but that's not necessarily ideal for a person to have their hands overhead like that, moving back and forth. Also, they need safety glasses. I have to point that out. Something I would have to say in person. Anyway, but the guy's even leaning over the hood, rounding at the back instead of hinging at the hips to look and see what's over the hood. Or the guy who's on his knees, he is on a kneeling mat, which is an awesome tool, but still not ideal for the human body to be doing these sort of things all day, every day. So what it really comes down to in this case is employee engagement, awareness, and training. They need the ability to identify the issue and take actions into their own hands. For example, manipulating the vehicle or their own posture to maintain a good posture with a neutral spine, lower the vehicle to the correct height. Such low-hanging fruit. You go by a group of lube technicians, and oftentimes they're putting that tire on at face level and they're torquing down the bolts. Well, they're not torquing them, but they got the torque sticks on there and they're zipping them in at head level. Those are things that we can reach out and say, hey, you got to save your shoulders, you got to save your back. Let's bring that down a little bit. Fit for duty testing, of course, to do some of these postures. You at least need to be able to have some mobility. And of course, the employee warming and stretching up programs go back to that, and that kind of encompasses everything. Cold temperatures, musculoskeletal symptoms are more frequent in cold work compared to normal temperature work. And symptoms seem to increase with longer time spent in cold conditions. So for example, our neck shoulder region, shoulders, wrists, low back are significantly heightened. The musculoskeletal risk and carpal tunnel disorder has been shown to increase 2.2-fold. So we've known this. We've had safety updates about this. We've talked about this many, many times. Of course, we need to avoid unnecessary work in cold conditions if all possible. Having a climate controlled environment is very important. I know your oil burners go out all the time, so let's make sure those stay maintained. A month of working in 40-degree weather could cause a $50,000 claim. Just a thought. Thermal gloves and thermal apparel, if you don't supply them, at least having that discussion with the employees, like, hey, maybe you should think about this. And then just having the awareness, giving the guys the training and gals, hey, listen, you need to stretch, warm up, wear your jacket, and understand that their risk is heightened whenever they're working in those cold environments will actually make a difference. Some other items to consider to reduce the likelihood of sprains and strains. I mentioned kneeling mats. I find them on Amazon for $10 to $20. They're in that picture on the top there, the black and red or the blue. Awesome tool. Mentioned this to a group of guys not very long ago, like, hey, have you thought about buying these? And they're like, yeah, it's the first thing I bought whenever I got my tool stipend. That's because they know how often they get down on their knees. But some people don't know those exist also. They had no idea that's even a thing that's common. So I would love it if somebody would supply these for their employees, but if not, strongly recommending they do that with their tool allowance, is buy those. They can hang them on their lift on either side, like I see some guys do. That way they can just throw them down whenever they need it, put it back up whenever they're done. Good fitting thermal gloves for hot and cold environments are a good idea. I mentioned wrist pads for keyboards. You guys have all went to keyboarding class whenever you were growing up. You need to keep those wrists straight. I didn't mention much about carpal tunnel because that's honestly pretty minor, all things considered, but there is some risk there for the people who work in the offices. So uh, if you're not going to train proper typing technique where you keep your wrists neutral, maybe you should think about giving those wrist pads that sit in front of the keyboard so they're forced to keep them. Same thing I did with my back braces. When I was a safety manager, I'd keep the same wrist braces as well. But again, we'd have to have that discussion. Like, this isn't a long-term solution for you. And again, back to the braces with so serious consideration about those. Fresh injury surgery should be under the direction of a doctor, and it's a good temporary solution used with early intervention, but you need to be working closely with that doctor if you're requiring it or the employee is insisting it. Wellness programs, these are these personal risk factors I mentioned at the beginning. Of course, you guys saw the data on what the elderly have as far as sprain and strain cost goes, and it's a pretty high correlation. The obesity problem reduces blood flow. So if you guys are going to build a wellness program, that's definitely something you want to address. You want to address it properly, not just some biggest loser challenge. I mean, like, legitimately getting people to think about their health. Same thing with smoking and substance abuse. Smoking going to cause reduced blood flow as well, blood restriction. Therefore, we're not going to get blood to that muscle, and we're not going to be able to heal it as quickly as we should be. There's actually some good studies on that. If you do a little bit of Googling on PubMed, preventative care, early intervention, reporting programs, and addressing postural and lifestyle issues. So, like I said earlier, aging workforce, major problem. 40 million people over the age of 55 are in the workplace now. That's an increase of 43% since 2008. 79% of baby boomers do not expect to retire before the age of 65. I've heard that the average technician is over 50. I get weird stats from that, but we all know that they're getting pretty high up there. So addressing this now could absolutely have a major impact in the future. So they are more prone to musculoskeletal disorders, and on average take longer to recover. So we need to be mindful of what their needs are, what their limitations are, without being discriminatory. I put a note in here. Doctors have become great at fixing hearts and other organs that'll help us live longer. But what about backs and shoulders? I had a chiropractor come at me with that question one time. Like, imagine if you were able to live to be 110 but it's painful to even get out of bed. Your spine's in such bad order, and that really stuck with me. And I feel like that's a good way to train people. Like maybe you should think about putting out some information about preventative care. Um, through your health insurance that you provide. And honestly, your health insurance company can probably get you a whole bunch of resources for free to address a lot of these overall personal risk factors and wellness. But as with any ergonomic program, the goal is to supply education and training to the employee, fit the task to the worker, um, using workspace design and early intervention. So we just need to be mindful. And I am not in any way saying we should discriminate against older people, because you guys know as well as I do that those are probably some of your most valuable employees, the ones who know exactly what they're doing, um, especially in those very skilled labor jobs. Postural problems. Postural problems are associated with a whole host of issues. You can see there in the left column. Um, and because of the increased sedentary nature of some youths and adults, not only obesity is a problem, but postural issues can translate into injuries when activity is performed. Um, so, um, recommend disseminating information and resources to help employees understand the risks of not addressing postural issues and following up on them on their own, because you can't go around coaching people on their posture. But at the very least, I think disseminating that information is very important, very valuable tool, because not everybody's going off on their own and researching how to correct postural problems. Just fact of life. This is something that excites me, the future. Exoskeletons, those pictures you see on the right are from a Ford plant. These are currently in use. They do very similar activities to what dealership employees do when they're assembling those vehicles. Some other companies have definitely got on board with this as well, with some prototypes. These are not powered systems. They're ran off a series of springs and cords and things of that nature that are going to give the user an additional 5 to 15 pounds of force with whatever motion they're doing. So this guy who's been working overhead all day, he's not getting nearly the amount of stress on his body as somebody who wouldn't be wearing one of those. And they're only going to get better. They're expected to increase by use by 229% each year in the industrial hard markets. It'll probably be the big boys, the Fords, the GMs of the world, that put these into place. But I would be surprised if in 20 years we don't have a system that can be used for light duty when somebody has a shoulder injury, back injury, or something that somebody wears all day, every day. Somebody in that aging workforce category who needs to work until they're 70, but don't have the spryness of a 20, 30-year-old, not spryness, but mobility of somebody of that age. So something to look forward to. It excites me as a safety professional for sure. Some final thoughts or recommendations. Make sure you provide training for your employees. Reach out to me, reach out to Marlon, and we can help you get some resources together. You need to discuss formal stretching warm-up program with your team. Is it right for you? And if you want to go about that again, let us know and we'll definitely help you out where we can. Evaluate the workplace. Do you see any low-hanging fruit that you can address? So get out there and spend some time in the real place. Observe where can you improve the processes that you already have in place? What mechanical assistance devices do you have? Do you have enough? Do they work? Talk to your employees. And you need to open communication with employees regarding those almost injuries, those early intervention um, uh, activities. They'll definitely reduce the cost of your overall sprains and strains over the long term. So making sure employees know that they signed to the policy that said they're going to report all accidents, but also making sure they know that it is safe for them to actually come to you and say, I have pain, soreness in this part of my body, and addressing that however you can, whether it's through modifying their workspace, taking them to get some of that treatment, or just doing icing, whatever it might be, on your own. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for logging on, listening. Again, I know your time is valuable, but in our opinion, this is a very valuable information, and we're glad that you came along for the ride. So have a great day, and we will see you in your stores relatively soon, I'm sure. Have a great day.